Good afternoon. My name is Judy Wilson, and I'm a member of the Author Selection Committee. In her novel, Real Americans, Rachel Khong creates a family saga that spans 3 generations and 2 continents. She takes us from Chairman Mao's Cultural Revolution in China in 1966 to America's modern-day world of cutting-edge science and technology. But The Real Americans is far more than the story of one family. It poses questions about what makes us who we are, how inevitable are our futures, and what right does science have in perfecting human life. It explores the themes of power, money, class, and identity. Throughout the book, there are glimpses of fantasy and magical realism. Her characters can make time stand still. A biologist can genetically engineer a designer child. Rachel Khong also has a superpower. She has the ability to tell a riveting tale which can still be considered a parable for life's existential challenges. Real Americans was an instant New York Times bestseller, and LitHub named it as one of the biggest books of 2024. It was selected for Jenna Bush's Today's Show book club. The Kirkus Review praised Real Americans as bold, thoughtful, and delicate all at once, through carefully crafted scenes and characters. The New York Times Book Review noted, "The story is full of family secrets and discoveries that could easily veer into melodrama, but Khong is a deft writer who grounds even the most sweeping themes and scenes." This is Rachel Khong's second novel. Her debut novel, Goodbye Vitamin, which I thoroughly enjoyed, won the California Book Award for First Fiction. Born in Malaysia to a Chinese-Malaysian family, she moved to the United States when she was 2. She grew up locally in Rancho Cucamonga and attended high school in Diamond Bar. She then went on to earn a degree in English from Yale. She also holds a master's degree in fine arts from the University of Florida. Please help me welcome Rachel Khong. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you everyone for being here. I know it's been a longish day, but I hope you've been as inspired as I have been. Thank you, Judy. Thank you to all the members of the selection committee and to all of you for being here and supporting writing and women writers. It has been just such an honor. Like Judy said, I grew up locally and now I do live here locally, so I hope not in Pasadena, but nearby in Glassell Park, about 15 minutes away, so I hope I get to see some of you again. So I have a photo of myself that's hanging above my desk. I actually brought it. I know it's impossible to see this probably. I'll have it in my signing line if you want to see it closer. I'm in kindergarten. I'm wearing a pink shirt in front of this calendar that says September 1990. There are red apples hanging behind me, and each apple has a day of the month on it. My hair is in this short bob with straight bangs, a haircut that I'm pretty sure my mother gave me because she, despite not being a hairstylist, always cut my hair. She even had one of those like capes that you put on at the salon, and she would put them on me and my brothers. And she went through a phase of perming just my bangs. I was in Essie's talk earlier, and you mentioned loving the 80s. Yeah, this was very much an 80s look. I looked like a poodle, and there's a reason that's not the photo. That's the one that's hanging above my desk. But in this photo, my hair's straight, and I'm gazing into the camera, not smiling. In most of the photos from this particular time, I wear this same expression, the sort of like haunted, staring into the middle distance expression. And that's the person that I see every time that I sit down to write. As a writer, people like to ask me, when did you know you wanted to be a writer? And I remember when I was the age I was in that photo, people asked a different question. They asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? When I was, well, so I think both of those questions are funny because they're so casual and they're deeply existential at the same time. My parents were civil engineers before they retired, and neither of them got to tell a conference room of people when or why they became civil engineers. I was wondering, why do writers get asked this particular question? Maybe if I came to writing as an adult, I would have a more thought out, intellectual, sophisticated answer. But I've been a writer since I was that little girl in a pink shirt. I think the question behind the question is, why are you a writer? Again, casual and existential at the same time. Because inside that question is another one. Why are you here at all? What are any of us doing here? But I'll try to keep this short. So when I was asked as a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? I might have said a figure skater or a marine biologist. Growing up, and this resonates with so many people who have spoken already today, I just didn't know that you could become a writer. I loved reading, and I think what a lot of us here have in common is this habit of going to the library as kids, checking out as many books as you were allowed to. When I was in elementary school, there was also this program called Book It. Some of you might know it was put on by Pizza Hut, and you read a certain number of books every month, and then you could redeem that list of books for a personal pan pizza. So I redeemed my pizza every month, and I ate a lot of pizza as a kid. Books stoked my imagination, but writers were as mythical as any of those characters in the books, as mermaids, as far-fetched as time travel. Being a figure skater seemed more realistic because I watched them on the Olympics on TV. So that was achievable, right? Or I could be a marine biologist studying sea creatures. I was really obsessed with anybody who had the same first name as me, so I was really into Rachel Carson. and so I was like, marine biologist, that seems cool. Or an engineer, like my parents. But recently my mom actually told me that my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Kinshoven, had said to her all of those years ago, Rachel might be a writer. So why did I become a writer? Did I become a writer, or have I been a writer this whole time? My novel, Real Americans, asks, how do we become who we become? What do we choose, and what's chosen for us? For me, was becoming a writer inevitable? I've always been interested in that question because it's gone hand in hand with being an immigrant. Judy mentioned this in her intro, but my family came to America when I was 2 years old. I was born in Subang Jaya, Malaysia, and I've often wondered who I would be, who I would have been if I had stayed there, and if my parents had never made the decision to come here. Would I be a writer today? Real Americans came from those questions. What makes us who we are, and how do the choices that were made for us make us who we are? I wonder who I would have been if I had stayed in Malaysia, or was being a writer fundamental to who I am somehow? Did I become a writer because I became an American? So around the time this photo was taken, I still spoke English in the way that my parents did, with their Malaysian accent. I remember being made fun of just by the other kids for speaking English sort of differently, for not knowing the American way to say things. In another humiliation, I was once given an Oreo filled with toothpaste as a prank, and I remember thinking, this tastes strange. Is it some kind of disgusting mint-filled Oreo? But I continued to eat it because I doubted my own judgment until another kid who was horrified by what they were witnessing said, Rachel, stop. And I don't mean to bring up various childhood traumas. I promise that I'm okay now. I'm not trying to get you to feel sorry for me and buy my book, although that's fine if you want to. this is all just to say that I think I gravitated to writing because writing was a way around that. In writing, I could say exactly what I wanted to say, communicate exactly how I wanted to. Speaking filled me with fear. It still kind of does, although less so, because when I was speaking, I messed things up. In writing, I could express myself exactly the way that I wanted to. Books were my own private world, my refuge from kids who told me what was right and wrong. Reading and writing were how I played. I was very much an indoor kid. I loved reading, pressing flowers, collecting stamps, rock tumbling. Indoor kid is a nice way to put that I was just a huge nerd. But writing and reading were their own special thrill. They involved imagination, and imagination was better than anything else. It was limitless and it was freeing. I could imagine what it was like to be someone else, to live somewhere else. The fantastical felt real to me and entirely possible. That you might find a talisman that would grant you half your wish, like in Edward Eger's Half Magic, or that you could travel through time and space, like the kids did in A Wrinkle in Time. There was a thrill in imagining Mrs. Pigglewiggle's upside-down house. And I 100%, like this has come up a few times today, but I 100% believed in ghosts, in the Loch Ness Monster, in aliens, in time travel, and to be honest, I still kind of do. My father installed a green curtain in my bedroom because he worried that my vision would grow bad from all the reading. He wanted me to take breaks from the reading and look up at this green curtain on occasion, thinking that might save my eyesight. He said that green was soothing for the eyes. Spoiler alert, the curtain did not work, and I have really bad vision. Thankfully, we live in a time when I can correct that. But to be honest, I don't think it was the books. I think it was my genes. Yet it wasn't as though being an avid reader and loving writing guaranteed that I would be a writer, because again, I didn't know that you could be one. I remember experimenting with saying that desire out loud. I want to be a writer, I would tell my parents. And in response, my parents would say, "Oh, you mean you want to be a journalist?" Like so many parents, I think especially immigrant parents, they wanted stability for me. And journalism, at least back then, seemed like a viable career choice. But I wrote, and I never stopped writing. I wrote when I was 7 years old, and when I was 12 and 14 and 20 and 25. I'm 40 this July, and I am still making up stories. The stories that I made up at age 5 are different from the ones that I made up at 14 and 35. And the stories are different because I'm different. So I don't know if you become something so much as you just be it. And in the being, you do become. I don't think I became a writer or arrived at anything. I write, which made me a writer at age 5, and it makes me a writer now. So that's the how, sort of. But what about the why? Why did I write? Why do I still write? I write because it's so much fun. I write because I crave the feeling of getting a sentence exactly right. I write because I want to return the gift that I've received as a reader. Reading has given me so much pleasure and joy, and I hope that I can do the same for readers of my work. And maybe I still write because that very old part of me hopes that in writing I can say exactly what I want to say and be understood. In the years since, I think I've grown to understand that perfect understanding isn't actually possible, and as humans, we're always missing each other and misunderstanding each other all the time. And I've also grown to understand that that's okay. I think writing and reading are still the best ways to try. Years ago, I might have said that I wrote because I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be approved of. But that's different now, too. I don't think anything I accomplish or do makes me more or less worthy of love, more or less valuable as a human being. I write because it's a way for me to metabolize life, to understand what it means to be alive, not as any other person, but specifically as me. And I read because I'm interested in how it feels to be you. So now I'm kind of wondering if we could just try something a little different, and if I could propose that you all imagine something along with me, and if you would all just close your eyes. You can just take a deep breath and let it out very slowly. Picture yourself in a field. It's a green, grassy field. Maybe it's dotted with wildflowers. Notice what color the flowers are. Notice what color the sky is. You're walking in this field and you approach a structure. Remember playing MASH as a kid, trying to predict the future? The structure can be a mansion, an apartment, a shack, or a house. It can be any of those things. Just picture it now, whatever it is. And picture the door. Is it big or small? What color is it? Now you're right in front of the door. Push the door open. Now you're inside the house or the apartment or whatever it is. And now you look around. Just register what it's like. I'm sure that in this particular crowd, there are lots of books lining the walls. Think of the decor, think of what kind of furniture is there. So you're not alone in this house, not in a menacing way. There's some other friends here. In fact, there's another you in this house. It's you from 10 years ago. She or he or they look a little younger. She doesn't actually acknowledge you. They don't seem to see you. They're just going about their business. What are they doing? What room are they in? What is the you of 10 years ago interested in? Are they in the kitchen baking a cake? Are they taking a bath in the clawfoot tub? You notice there are others. There you are at age 18, 20, 25, 30. There's you at age 13 and 10 and 8 and 5. What are all of these versions of you interested in? Is the 5-year-old reading book after book in her bedroom with a green curtain? Is the 20-year-old pouring herself some orange juice and vodka? Is the 6-year-old admiring her permed bangs in the mirror? Can you be curious about each of them? Can you let yourself picture all of these different versions of yourself with as much compassion as you possibly can? It might be tempting to judge any of them, to wish that they knew what you know now, but they don't. They're exactly where they're supposed to be, as you are exactly where you're supposed to be right now. They're you, but they're not exactly you. You can think of them as friends or maybe family members. They have different priorities and different dreams. How are these dreams similar to yours right now? And how are they different? Okay, so you can take another deep breath and then open your eyes. What do you want to be when you grow up? Who are you and who do you want to be right now? Why are any of us here? Like I said, just casual and existential at the same time. I write because I have these questions. I don't have the answers, but I write because I'm asking them. Writing to me feels like prioritizing my own imagination. I'm interested in a world in which we all prioritize our own imaginations. When I see the photo of 5-year-old me, I want to be responsible to her, to change the things that she couldn't in ways that she couldn't. Lately, the future feels so unstable and so uncertain. I mean, we've talked about that so much today, just the tragedy all around. Times have been weird, to say the least, to put it very mildly. And I think that in these weird times, our imaginations get sucked toward, darker purposes. I find myself imagining everything that could go wrong. The end of the world, for example. My mind gravitates to questions like, do I have enough water in the go bag? But I think that fear and anxiety are uninteresting to me. They're a closed off kind of imagination that leads us to assume the worst about other people. They're usually the same kind of story. There's this other kind of imagination that's the kind that I had as a kid. It's the expansive, limitless kind. That kind of imagination doesn't care if what you write is good or bad. It's not afraid of what anyone thinks. It can go anywhere, do anything. And it just feels really good. It feels really pleasurable to engage in. We're living in a time that feels especially adversarial to an individual imagination. Screens and social media want us to flatten ourselves. We're constantly told what to want, what to buy, what to think. But I think that imagination is anti-authoritarian, and our intact imaginations are necessary to creating new worlds, both in fiction and in our actual world. This time calls for our imaginations. It needs us all to be imagining something different and something better. And that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Hello?
Uh-oh.
Thank you.
Thank
Sorry
you,
to be
Mary.
late with the
No.
microphone, but that was really wonderful. I appreciate it. I know everybody did. I have just a couple of questions that maybe others have asked and wondered about too. When we read the book, the title, Real Americans, probably grabs everyone in a personal way. But can you talk to us about your choice of the title, Real Americans, for your book?
Well, for a long time, this book was called New Thing, 2016. And it was called that for years. And it assaulted me every time I opened that Word document. And Real Americans came up I think in a moment when Lily's character in part one visits China, where she's never been, even though she's ethnically Chinese, and someone there says to her, "Oh, you're a real American." I think that, as I mentioned, I started the book in 2016. I started it in December 2016, right after that election. And that phrase was in the air. And when the phrase came up in the book, I thought, oh, I think this is what the book is, because it was sort of, Lily is in a moment where, she has never felt quite at home in America. At the same time, when she goes to this place where she's technically from, when people ask that question, where are you really from? She doesn't belong there either, and she's sort of this outsider. So I knew that it had to be called that with all of its baggage, and I was so afraid, honestly, because first of all, I thought, having American in the title is so intense. It's just like so big and so fraught, and then you put the real there, and it's funny. I think that some people in this country really do have an idea of what that means to be a real American, but I think it's a term that's. Yeah, I question maybe the existence of the term itself. Like, why do we have to qualify Americanness in that way? Yeah.
And maybe it means different things to different people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One thing that struck me, and I haven't organized the question too well, but those of us who heard Rita Bullwinkle talk about the boxing and the girls, one character in your book is the boy, Lily's son. Can you talk a little bit about developing teenage boy in your story? Because we don't read a lot of stories about teenager boys in our choices.
Yeah, I mean, I think teenage boys should definitely be writing more about what it means to be a teenage boy or what that's like, because I could really only guess. And I don't really know why that character came to me as he did, but he really did come to me exactly as he was, and while he was learning how to drive in a parking lot. And I did a lot of well, I talked especially to one friend of mine who was a guidance counselor at a high school to sort of get her perspective on Gen Z boys. But, you know, with any of these characters, I haven't lived their lives exactly. And fiction, both writing and reading, is this exercise in imagining yourself in someone else's position. And so that is what I did, and I thought it was really fun to be a teenage boy.
I like the kid.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Another one about family in general, your three-generational family saga. You incorporate elements of fantasy and magical realism, and that's sort of an interesting way to weave through three generations. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so Sheila talked about this earlier. I don't even know that I conceived of the book in that way, like as a fantastic or a magical book. It was only until probably a few years into the writing of this book that I realized that this magical component had to be in there. It's not a huge part, don't be scared.
It's a fun part.
It's a fun part, yeah. I mean, this was very much, I think for many years, it was a book about science. It's still a book about science. But I also realized that perhaps unglamorously, it's a book about the limits of being a human being, the limits of what we can understand about ourselves, about each other, and even about science. I think that we live in a world that's very materialistic, that's very just rational, and that believes that, you know, that we will eventually figure everything out. And I'm sort of on the maybe side, and I think that the presence of magic in the book was a way to question that a little bit, right? To question that belief that we could know everything or even anything, right? Like we're here for such a limited amount of time, and we're limited by our own perspectives, you know, just as individuals. And so the magic was sort of there to, I mean, really to remind me that like, no, you don't know everything, and there's mystery to other people, but especially yourself, yeah.
Thank you. And the flip side of the spectrum of that, I think, question is about genetic engineering, which is a significant part of the book. And I wondered if you could talk about you just mentioned the role of science, and there be boundaries, and where does there's the dichotomy there,
Yeah.
the magic and the genetic engineering. Talk to us.
Yeah, well, I sort of mentioned, you know, one of the reasons for writing this book was just an interest in how we become who we are, and, you know, the decisions that my parents made for me, for example, that made me who I am. And at the time that I started writing the book, I had had some friends who had gone through IVF and and I think IVF just like sort of like sparked my imagination, because it's pretty wild what we can do now with science. And, you know, it's just such an amazing hope for people who are going through infertility. At the same time, you know, I was sort of wondering, where will this go in terms of what we get to choose for ourselves and for our future generations, especially when it's so difficult, I think, to know what you actually want, because I think a lot of the things that we want are just placed, they're wants that have been placed there by society, by culture, by whatever it is, right? Just like what our friends like, you know? And I think that it just struck me as very dangerous that we, with our flawed perspective and our limited imaginations, would then get to sort of choose like who gets to exist. And so I think, yeah, so this book really came out of that question, like what of course, like, it makes sense to not want a child to suffer through a debilitating disease. But there are other ways of being that are just different. And I think it's important not to stamp out difference just because it's different, to really celebrate diversity of voices, because that is what humanity is. And I think it all went hand in hand with like talking about America and like being said in America, because here there's such lip service paid to diversity, and still we see it now in this reaction, but just like a desire for homogeneity and a desire for one real American, I guess.
I'm not going to touch that,
No.
but I agree. One last question, and it is more back to your role or journey as writer. My notes show that you started writing, and you said Real Americans in 2016, and published Goodbye Vitamin, your debut novel, in 2017. So what was it like to juggle both projects at the same time? Did you ever get confused about the characters or the plot lines?
Well, publishing takes
Did you need a timeline and bullet points?
This book was very confusing, but I also don't write with an outline. Publishing just takes a really long time. So between submitting your book and publishing it, there's usually a pretty big gap. So that is when I began this book. I wasn't juggling both sets of characters. Okay. I do have a new book that I'm working on, currently titled New Thing 2022. So 2022. That's the cycle.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Well, we wish you the best of luck with the future, and thank you so much for today.
Thank you, everyone.